Riverdale stretched along the banks of the Miami River, as if divided by an invisible line into two worlds. On the east side stood glass office buildings and well-kept mansions in the business district, where those who ran the county's largest enterprises lived. On the west side, brick houses in working-class neighborhoods were interspersed with bars, snack bars, and small shops. The river between them seemed not just a water barrier, but a symbol of the gulf between two ways of life. Eleanor Campbell parked her black BMW at the main entrance of the Riverdale manufacturing office building at exactly 7 in the morning, as she had done every day for the past 12 years. At 65, she was still a slender woman with neatly styled gray hair and sharp brown eyes. Her strict business suit emphasized her status, but could not hide the fatigue that had accumulated over 3 years of loneliness. "Good morning, Mrs. Campbell," greeted her secretary, Jennifer, handing her a folder with the daily reports. "Morning," Eleanor replied curtly without slowing her pace toward her office on the 6th floor. The windows of her office offered a view of the entire city. Eleanor could see the smoking factory chimneys, residential areas, and even the western part of the city, where the neon sign of the Blue Moon Bar stood out among other establishments. She often lingered on that side of the city, especially in recent months. The workday began with a board meeting. Eleanor reported on the quarterly results with her usual precision, but her mind was elsewhere. Her colleagues saw the Iron Lady of the financial world, who never made mistakes in her calculations and always kept her emotions in check. They didn't know that in the evenings, this same woman sat in an empty house, leafing through photos of her deceased husband and fighting the emptiness that seemed to consume her from within. After Robert's death 3 years ago, Eleanor threw herself into her work. Her colleagues respected her subordinates feared her, but she had no close friends. The social events she was required to attend as a company representative only emphasized her loneliness among couples and families. That same morning, a few miles from the office center, Ethan Riley was finishing cleaning up at the Blue Moon Bar. A tall, athletic young man with dark hair and piercing blue eyes, he had the kind of masculine appeal that made women turn their heads on the street. But what was most striking about Ethan was not his appearance, but his ability to instantly adapt to the person he was talking to become exactly who others wanted him to be. "Ethan, don't forget to check the alcohol bill," Brian Mitchell, the manager of the establishment, called out from the back room. A man in his 40s with a receding hairline and sharp, shrewd eyes, he knew much more about his young employee than he let on. "Already on it," Ethan replied, glancing over the receipts. His fingers automatically shuffled through the documents, but his mind was preoccupied with other calculations. An expensive leather wallet lay on the bar counter, a gift from one of his admirers. In his jeans pocket jangled the keys to a used Honda he had recently bought with money he had earned not from working at the bar. Ethan was born and raised in the western part of Riverdale, where every dollar had to be fought for. His mother worked 2 jobs, and he didn't remember his father. At 14, he realized that charm could be a tool for survival, just as effective as fists or theft. By the age of 21, Ethan had perfected the art of psychological manipulation. He specialized in lonely women over 40 with stable financial situations. He studied their habits, found their weaknesses, and became what they needed: a son, a lover, a friend. The money came gradually, first small gifts, then help with unexpected expenses, then larger sums under various pretexts. "How much are you planning to make today?" Brian grinned, appearing next to him with a dirty rag in his hands. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan replied calmly, but a look of caution flashed in his eyes. "Of course you don't. I'm just curious how many rich ladies will accidentally drop by for a cocktail today." Brian had known about Ethan's side business from the beginning. What's more, he got his share for keeping quiet and creating the right atmosphere in the bar. The Blue Moon was the perfect place to meet people, respectable enough to attract wealthy women, but not so elite as to scare them away with its apparent inaccessibility. "Sarah, table number 5 is asking for the check!" Dolores, the owner of the Red Robin restaurant, called out from the kitchen. Sarah Wilson adjusted her apron and hurried to the table. The 20-year-old girl with chestnut hair tied back in a ponytail and a sincere smile had been working here for 2 years, combining her job with studies at a local college. Her dream of earning a degree in elementary education seemed increasingly distant due to a constant lack of money for tuition. But in recent months, Sarah felt that life was finally turning around for her. 6 months ago, she met Ethan at the Blue Moon Bar, where she had come to celebrate her friend's birthday. The tall, handsome bartender immediately caught her eye, but what impressed her even more was how attentively he listened when she talked about her plans and dreams. Since then, they had seen each other almost every day. Ethan would walk her home after work, and they would stroll through the city park or go to the movies. He was gentle and caring, always finding the right words of encouragement when she complained about being tired or struggling with her studies. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly loved. The only thing that bothered her a little was how little she knew about Ethan's past. He was reluctant to talk about his family and avoided conversations about his future plans. But Sarah attributed this to male secrecy and didn't press the issue. The main thing was that he was there for her. Last night, what she had been waiting for so long finally happened. Ethan proposed to her. It was simple, without any fuss, right outside her house after another walk. "Sarah, I want you to be my wife," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. "I know we haven't known each other for very long, but I'm sure of my feelings." He didn't have a ring, but Sarah didn't notice. What mattered were his words, the warmth in his voice that she heard for the first time. She accepted without hesitation. Now, as she waited tables at the restaurant, Sarah couldn't hold back a smile. Her co-workers noticed her high spirits and bombarded her with questions, but she kept the news a secret for now. She wanted to think everything through first, plan the wedding, tell her parents. "You're glowing like a Christmas tree today," Dolores teased her. "Did that handsome bartender finally propose?" Sarah blushed but said nothing. Dolores was an observant woman and had approved of Sarah's relationship with Ethan from the beginning. In the evening, the Blue Moon filled with its usual mix of workers finishing their shifts, young people, and lonely patrons looking for company. Ethan worked behind the bar with his usual ease, memorizing orders, joking with regulars, and discreetly sizing up each new customer. At 8:30, Eleanor Campbell entered the bar. She didn't look like she did at work. Instead of a strict suit, she was wearing a simple black dress with her hair down. But even in these clothes, she radiated that special aura of success that Ethan had learned to recognize without fail. Eleanor sat down at a table in the corner, ordered a glass of red wine, and took out her phone, pretending to be busy with important matters. In reality, she was nervous. It had been 3 weeks since she had started coming here, each time promising herself she would never return. After her husband's death, Eleanor had completely forgotten what it meant to be just a woman, not the financial director or widow of the late lawyer Campbell. But something about this bar, its relaxed atmosphere, allowed her to drop her usual mask for an hour or two. Ethan noticed her right away. In 3 weeks, he'd already studied her habits. She always came alone, ordered a glass of wine, and stayed no more than an hour. An expensive handbag, high-quality shoes, the posture of someone used to giving orders. Everything spoke of high social status. But there was something else about her that caught his attention. Loneliness. A deep, painful loneliness that she tried to hide behind her outward confidence. "The usual?" he asked, approaching her table with a bottle of wine. "Yes, thank you," Eleanor nodded, surprised that he remembered her preference. "Tough day?" Ethan asked, pouring the wine. His voice sounded sympathetic, without the false cheerfulness he used with other customers. Eleanor looked up and took a good look at the young bartender for the first time. He had a handsome face and intelligent eyes that showed genuine interest. When was the last time someone had asked about her well-being out of a genuine desire to know? "All days are difficult right now," she replied more quietly than she had intended. Ethan nodded understandingly. "Sometimes you just need to talk. Bartenders are lucky in that sense. We're better at listening to confessions than priests." Eleanor smiled, the first time she had in weeks. "I'm afraid my confession will be too boring for a young man." "Try to surprise me," Ethan replied, and there was not a hint of mockery in his voice. They talked for the next half hour. Eleanor talked about her job, about how difficult it was to be a woman in a man's world of business, about the empty house that awaited her every evening. Ethan listened attentively, asked the right questions, and shared his own observations about life. He was surprisingly mature for his age, understanding. When Eleanor got ready to leave, Ethan walked her to the door. "See you tomorrow?" he asked. Eleanor wanted to say no, but heard her own voice say, "Maybe." Ethan watched her until she got into her car. A plan began to form in his head. This woman wasn't just another target. She was the jackpot, a financial director of a large company, single, clearly wealthy. And most importantly, desperately in need of human warmth. Taking out his phone, Ethan typed a message to Sarah. "I miss you. See you tomorrow after work?" He genuinely loved this girl, and yesterday's proposal had come from the heart. But love and business were two different things. Sarah was his future, and Eleanor Campbell was the means to secure that future. Brian watched the scene from behind the bar, smiling. He had seen Ethan in action many times before, but this lady looked particularly promising. That meant his share would be substantial. Night fell on Riverdale, unaware that a story was unfolding in its quiet streets that would shake the entire town in a few months' time. A story about how loneliness can become a weapon, love a commodity, and revenge the only way out. 2 months had passed since the evening when Eleanor first spoke to Ethan. Now her visits to the Blue Moon had become regular, every Tuesday and Friday at exactly 8:30. She no longer pretended that she had come by chance. Ethan had reserved a regular table for her in a quiet corner where they could talk without attracting attention. Over the course of 2 months, Ethan did a brilliant job. He studied Eleanor like an experienced psychologist studies a patient. He knew that she woke up every day at 5 in the morning and couldn't fall asleep until midnight. He knew that her favorite food was pasta with seafood, which she used to cook for her late husband on weekends. He knew that she feared old age and loneliness more than death, and that behind her confident exterior was a woman who desperately needed to feel needed. Most importantly, he knew that Eleanor was falling in love with him. "You look tired," Eleanor remarked one evening when Ethan approached her table. She had learned to read his mood from the smallest details, the way he held his shoulders, the expression in his eyes, the tone of his voice. "A little," Ethan admitted, sitting down opposite her. Brian had long since allowed him to spend time with special clients during work hours. "Car trouble. It needs repairs again." That wasn't true. The car was running fine, but Ethan was carefully laying the groundwork for his first big request. In 2 months, he had never asked Eleanor for money, only accepting small gifts, an expensive pen, a cashmere scarf, a watch. Each gift was accompanied by his embarrassed protests and sincere gratitude. "What's wrong with it?" Eleanor asked sympathetically. "Engine trouble. The mechanic says it needs to be replaced or it'll be a total loss." Ethan rubbed his forehead, feigning concern. "I can't get to work without a car or deliver groceries for my mom, but the repairs will cost $3,000. I don't have that kind of money." Eleanor was silent, but Ethan could see her thinking about what he had said. Over the past 2 months, he had told her a touching story about his sick mother who depended on his help, and his younger sister whom he was helping to pay for college. It was all a lie, but Eleanor believed every word. "Ethan," she began cautiously, "I could—" "No," he interrupted quickly. "Eleanor, you're already too kind to me. I can't accept this kind of help. But it's not forever. You can pay me back when you can." Ethan pretended to be struggling with himself. "I don't know, it's too much. What if I can't pay you back?" "You can," Eleanor said firmly. "I believe in you." She said these words with such sincerity that Ethan felt a twinge of conscience for a moment. But he quickly suppressed the feeling. Business was business. The next day, Eleanor transferred $3,000 to Ethan's account. He spent the money on a ring for Sarah. Simple but beautiful, the best his bartender's salary would allow. "Are you sure about the wedding?" Casey's friend asked Sarah as they were choosing a wedding dress in the only decent shop in Riverdale. "Of course I am," Sarah replied, trying on a simple white dress. "Why do you ask?" "You've only known him for 6 months. And besides, what do you know about him? His family, his past?" Sarah frowned. Those same questions tormented her, especially at night when she lay awake thinking about the upcoming wedding. "I know what matters. He loves me," she said, but her voice sounded uncertain. "Sarah, don't get me wrong. Ethan is a nice guy, but he's a bartender. Where did he get the money for a ring like that?" Casey nodded toward the engagement ring with a small diamond on Sarah's finger. "He saved up," Sarah replied. but she wondered the same thing herself. The ring did look expensive for a bartender's salary. Casey wanted to say something else, but she saw the look on her friend's face and kept quiet. Sarah was in love, and no amount of reasoning could change her mind. Meanwhile, the subject of their conversation was sitting in a cafe across from the jewelry store, watching his fiancée through the window. Ethan felt a strange mixture of tenderness and guilt. He truly loved Sarah. She was the only honest feeling in his life. But love did not negate the need to earn a living. His phone vibrated with a message from Eleanor. "How's the car? Hope the repairs went well." Ethan quickly typed a reply. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to thank you. You saved me." The reply came almost instantly. "The main thing is that you can help your mom now. See you on Tuesday?" "Sure, I can't wait." Ethan put his phone away and looked at Sarah, who was laughing at her friend's joke. In a month, they would be married, and he would be able to quit his dangerous game with single women. But before that, he had to get the most out of Eleanor. Eleanor sat in her office looking through her bank statements. The $3,000 she had spent on helping Ethan wasn't a critical amount for her, but she still felt the need to justify it. Not to her boss. The money was hers. To herself. She had changed over the past few months. Her colleagues noticed that she smiled more often and stayed late at work less. Even her secretary, Jennifer, remarked that there was a special sparkle in her eyes. The reason for all these changes was Ethan. For the first time in 3 years since her husband's death, Eleanor felt alive. She looked forward to Tuesdays and Fridays, thinking about what to wear and what to talk about with him. She bought books he mentioned and watched movies he liked. Eleanor understood the absurdity of the situation. A woman of her age and position, in love with a bartender who could be her grandson. But for the first time in many years, she felt like she wasn't a financial director or the widow of a respected lawyer, but simply a woman. Ethan saw her for exactly what she was, a woman. He listened to her opinions, was interested in her thoughts, and cared about her mood. Of course, she understood that their relationship had no future. The age difference was too great, and they came from different social classes. But couldn't they just enjoy the present? Couldn't she help a good man who had fallen on hard times? The phone rang. "Mrs. Campbell, a representative from the bank is here," said the secretary. "Please show him in." A middle-aged man in a formal suit entered the office. "David Harrison, VIP client manager," he introduced himself. "I'd like to discuss some new investment opportunities with you." They spent the next hour talking about securities, deposits, and pension funds. Harrison was a professional and quickly realized that he was dealing with someone who knew her finances very well. "You have an impressive portfolio," he remarked at the end of the conversation. "Very conservative and reliable investments." "I don't like to take risks," Eleanor replied. "A wise approach. It's especially important to think about capital security at your age." After the banker left, Eleanor sat by the window for a long time, thinking. Capital security. When was the last time she thought about the security of her own heart? On Tuesday, Ethan met Eleanor with a bouquet of modest flowers. "What's this?" she asked in surprise. "Just wanted to say thank you. For your help, for your understanding, for being in my life." Eleanor blushed like a little girl. When was the last time a man had given her flowers just because? They sat down at their usual table, but the atmosphere was special. Ethan was especially attentive, especially tender. He talked about how grateful his mother was for his help, how well his sister was doing in college. "You know," he said at one point, "sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough for you." "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, alarmed. "You're so smart, successful, beautiful, and I'm just a bartender from a working-class neighborhood." "Ethan, don't be silly. It's not a person's profession that defines them. It's their soul. And you have a beautiful soul." He took her hand in his. "You're the only one who thinks that." Eleanor felt her heartbeat quicken at the touch of his fingers. "I'm sure you're not the only one." "No, you're the only one," Ethan said quietly. "Others only see my appearance, but you see the real me." His words hit home. Eleanor had dreamed her whole life of someone seeing her for who she was, not her position, her status, or her money. And now this young man was telling her the same thing. Eleanor, Ethan continued, I want to be honest with you. I have problems. What kind of problems? Financial problems. Serious ones. He let go of her hand and leaned back in his chair. Remember I told you about my father's debts? Eleanor nodded. A month ago, Ethan had mentioned that his father had run up debts before he died, which were now hanging over the family. The creditors are getting more insistent. They're threatening to take my mother's house. Ethan's voice faltered. $15,000. That's an impossible amount of money for me. Eleanor was silent, but her heart ached with sympathy. 15,000. It wasn't that much money to her. I understand this isn't your problem, Ethan said quickly. I'm sorry to burden you. Don't say that, Eleanor interrupted him. Your problems are my problems. Ethan looked at her hopefully. Do you really mean that? Of course, we're friends. The word friends sounded unconvincing. They both knew that there had been something more than friendship between them for a long time. I can't ask you for that kind of help, Ethan said. 15,000 is a lot of money. It's a lot for you. For me, it's manageable. Eleanor leaned closer. Ethan, let me help you. Please. He hesitated for a long time, pretending to struggle internally. What if I can't pay you back? You will, someday, and if you can't, it's no big deal. Think of it as a gift. A gift? Ethan pretended to be shocked. Yes, between friends. Eleanor smiled. I don't have any children to leave it to. Better to spend the money on helping a good person than leave it to the government. Ethan took her hands in his and brought them to his lips. Thank you, he whispered. You're saving my family. Eleanor felt dizzy from the touch of his lips on her skin. At that moment, she was ready to give him all her savings, just to see the gratitude and tenderness in his eyes. The next day, Eleanor transferred $15,000 to Ethan's account, and the day after that, he made a deposit on a small cottage on the outskirts of town, his future family home with Sarah. Brian watched with cynical admiration. 15 pieces in one night, he said to Ethan when the bar emptied. You've outdone yourself. That's not all, Ethan replied, wiping glasses. The last big score is coming soon. How much are you planning to get out of her? 50,000, maybe more. Brian whistled. Are you sure she can handle that much? She will. The key is to present it correctly. Ethan placed the glass on the shelf. I'll tell her I want to start my own business. And then you'll marry a waitress and disappear? Exactly. The wedding's in 3 weeks. After that, I'm out of this business for good. Brian shook his head skeptically. You know what surprises me? How a smart woman like her falls for your tricks. A financial director, for God's sake. All women are the same when it comes to love, Ethan remarked philosophically. He didn't notice that sitting in the corner of the bar behind a pillar was a regular customer, an elderly woman named Gladys, who had been coming here every evening for many years. Gladys knew Eleanor Campbell well, and what she heard made her wonder whether she should warn the respectable lady of the danger. Eleanor lay in bed, unable to sleep. Over the past few months, she had spent $18,000 on Ethan, not counting gifts, watches, clothes, an expensive briefcase. For a woman of her means, it wasn't a critical amount, but it still made her think. She remembered the touch of his lips on her hands and felt a familiar warmth in her lower abdomen. When was the last time she had felt physical desire? After her husband's death, her body had become numb, no longer reminding her of itself. And now, a few miles away, Ethan lay next to Sarah, who was sleeping peacefully, holding his hand. He stared at the ceiling and planned his last move in the game with Eleanor Campbell. 1 more month, and he would be free. $50,000 would give him and Sarah a good start to their family life. Gladys Morton had lived in Riverdale for 73 years and knew almost everyone in town. After working as a school teacher for half a century, she had developed a keen sense for lies and deception. What she had heard at the Blue Moon 3 days ago would not let her rest. Sitting in her small living room with a cup of tea, Gladys considered her options. Eleanor Campbell was a decent woman who deserved to be warned. But how could she break the news delicately? And would she believe her? Finally, Gladys made up her mind and dialed Eleanor's number. Hello? came the familiar voice. Eleanor, dear, it's Gladys Morton, from the church committee. Oh, hello, Gladys. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. Listen, could you come over? There's something important I'd like to discuss in person. Eleanor was surprised. Gladys wasn't the type to ask for a private meeting without a serious reason. Of course. When would be convenient for you? Tonight, if you can. It's really important. After the call, Eleanor sat for a long time thinking, what could be so important? Problems with the charity committee? Or something personal? That same day, Ethan met with Sarah to discuss the final preparations for the wedding. They sat on a bench in the city park where he had once proposed to her. Mom asked about your family, Sarah said, flipping through the pages of her guest list. How many people are coming from your side? Ethan tensed. His imaginary sick mother and college student sister existed only in the stories he told Eleanor. A few. My mom isn't feeling well. I'm not sure she'll be able to make it. And your sister? She has exams. She probably won't be able to come either. Sarah frowned. Ethan, I've never even seen a photo of your family, and you've never invited me to your house. I explained, my mom is embarrassed about her condition. The house is in bad shape. Ethan took her hand. Everything will change after we get married. We'll rent a nice house and have big family dinners. You promise? Sarah looked at him hopefully. I promise. He kissed her on the forehead. By the way, I'm thinking about starting my own business after we get married. Really? What kind of business? A restaurant or a cafe. I have experience working with people. I know what they like. Ethan spoke confidently, but inside he was preparing for the big question. The only problem is the startup capital. How much do you need? $50,000 minimum for rent, equipment, initial expenses. Sarah whistled. That's a lot of money. Where are we going to get it? I'm working on it, Ethan replied evasively. Maybe I'll find an investor. He wasn't lying. Eleanor was the perfect investor for his latest scam. That evening, Eleanor arrived at Gladys's house. The old Victorian house was full of antiques and photographs of her former students. Gladys greeted her with a serious expression. Thank you for coming, she said, showing Eleanor into the living room. What I have to tell you is very delicate. Eleanor became wary. What is it? Gladys sat down opposite her and was silent for a long time, searching for the right words. Eleanor, I've known you for many years. You're an intelligent, successful woman. But since Robert's death, you've changed. In what way? You've become more vulnerable, and I'm afraid someone might take advantage of that. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Gladys, what are you talking about? The young man from the bar, Ethan Riley. Eleanor stood up abruptly. How did you? I'm at the Blue Moon a lot. I saw you together, and not just saw you. Gladys sighed heavily. 3 days ago, I overheard a conversation between him and the bar manager. For the next 10 minutes, Gladys recounted the conversation she had overheard word for word. About $50,000, about the last big score, about a wedding in 3 weeks. Eleanor listened, feeling the world around her crumble. Are you sure you heard that? She whispered. Absolutely sure. Eleanor, I know how much this hurts, but you have to know the truth. Eleanor was silent for a long time, digesting the information. A wedding in 3 weeks. So Ethan had a fiancée. So all his stories about his family, all his tender words, all his gratitude, it was all a lie. How much have you given him? Gladys asked cautiously. $18,000, Eleanor replied mechanically. Gladys gasped. My God, I was such a fool, Eleanor said, covering her face with her hands. Such a naive fool. Don't blame yourself. Loneliness makes us vulnerable to predators like that. Eleanor stood up and began pacing the room. What should I do? Go to the police? Is there any evidence of coercion? Did he force you to give him money? I offered to help him myself. Eleanor smiled bitterly. I even insisted when he refused. Then it will be difficult to prove from a legal standpoint. Eleanor stopped at the window, staring at the city lights. I want to talk to him, in person. Eleanor, that could be dangerous. Dangerous? Eleanor turned to Gladys. What can he do to me? Kill me? Steal the rest of my money? Her voice grew firmer. "Gladys, this boy thinks I'm a helpless old woman, willing to pay for the illusion of love. It's time to show him who he's dealing with." The next day, Ethan prepared for his decisive conversation with Eleanor. He came up with a convincing story about his entrepreneurial plans and prepared a business plan that he downloaded from the internet. $50,000, and he would be free forever. Eleanor arrived at the bar right on time, but Ethan immediately noticed that something had changed. Her posture was more tense, her gaze colder. She sat down at their usual table but didn't smile when she saw him. "Hi," Ethan said, approaching her. "You look upset. What's wrong?" "Sit down," Eleanor said curtly. "We need to talk." Ethan sat down across from her, feeling uneasy. "About what?" "About your plans for the future." Eleanor looked him straight in the eye. "Tell me about the wedding." Ethan felt the ground slip away from under his feet. "What wedding?" "Your wedding, in 3 weeks, to a girl named Sarah." They stared at each other for a few seconds. Ethan knew the game was over, but he was still trying to find a way out. "Eleanor, I can explain." "Explain what? How you systematically deceived a lonely woman? How you tricked her out of her money under false pretenses?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. The mask of the charming young man finally slipped from his face. "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I know the truth." Eleanor leaned forward. "There is no sick mother, is there? And no student sisters either?" "Eleanor, answer me." "No," Ethan said quietly. "They don't exist." Eleanor nodded, as if confirming what she already knew. "And your father's debts?" "That's a lie, too." $18,000, Ethan. You stole $18,000 from me. "You gave it to me!" Ethan snapped. "I never forced you! You lied to me! You pretended to have feelings for me!" Ethan looked at her with unexpected pity. "And you really believed those feelings? Seriously? A woman your age and a guy who could be your grandson?" Those words hit Eleanor harder than a slap. "Yes," she whispered. "I believed." "Then you're even more of a fool than I thought." Eleanor slowly stood up. Her face was pale, but her gaze was steely. "I want my money back." Ethan laughed. "There's no money left. It's all gone." "What did you spend it on?" "On a ring for my bride. On the house we're renting. On the wedding." He stood up and came closer. "Listen, Eleanor, I'm sorry it turned out this way. But you got what you paid for. Attention, care, the illusion that someone needed you. Wasn't that worth $18,000? Eleanor looked at him with disgust. "You're disgusting." "I'm a realist. And you know what? If it weren't for this wedding, I would have kept playing with you for a long time. You were willing to give me all your savings." "Yes, I was," Eleanor said quietly. "Because I thought you were a good person. Good people stay poor." Ethan returned to the table and sat down. "What are you planning to do? Go to the police? You have no proof of coercion." Eleanor was silent, studying his face. "Does your fiancé know what you do?" "Number and you won't tell her." "Why are you so sure?" "Because then the whole town will know what a fool you were. A successful businesswoman who was led around by the nose by a bartender." Ethan grinned. "Your reputation will be ruined." Eleanor stood motionless for a few more seconds, then turned and walked toward the exit. "Eleanor," Ethan called after her. "Forget about me. Find someone your own age. Maybe then you won't have to pay for attention." She stopped at the door without turning around. "Ethan?" "Yes? You made a big mistake." "What mistake?" "You showed me who you really are." With those words, Eleanor left the bar. Ethan watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. The game was over, but for some reason he didn't feel victorious. Eleanor got into her car and sat there for a long time, clutching the steering wheel. Humiliation, pain, anger, all these emotions were raging inside her, demanding an outlet. But what struck her most was her own blindness. How could she not have seen the obvious? How could she have been so naive? She took out her phone and started looking for information about Ethan Riley. Social media, public records, everything she could find. An hour later, she had a detailed dossier on the man who had deceived her. Ethan Michael Riley, 21 years old. has been working as a bartender at the Blue Moon for a year and a half. Before that, a string of odd jobs and 2 arrests for petty fraud. Engaged to Sarah Elizabeth Wilson, 20, a waitress at the Red Robin restaurant. The wedding is set for next Saturday. Eleanor looked at Sarah's photo on social media. A young, beautiful, happy girl who posted photos of her engagement ring and dreamed of her future family life. Poor thing, Eleanor whispered. She has no idea who she's marrying. At that moment, a plan began to form in her head. Did Ethan think he could destroy women's lives with impunity? That his fiancée would never find out the truth? He was sorely mistaken. Eleanor started the engine and drove home. She had a lot of work to do. She had to gather evidence, think through every step, and prepare for what was to happen on the wedding day. Ethan Riley was going to learn a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life, however short that might be. Saturday, June 15th. The day Sarah Wilson had been waiting for her entire life began with pouring rain. She woke up at 5:30 in the morning at her parents' house and looked out the window. Gray clouds covered the sky, and raindrops drummed on the glass with threatening persistence. "Rain on your wedding day means good luck," her mother, Linda, said as she entered the room with a cup of coffee. "That's what my grandmother used to say." Sarah tried to smile, but the anxiety that had plagued her for the past few days had not gone away. Yesterday, Ethan had seemed strange, distant, nervous. When she asked if everything was all right, he dismissed her, saying he was just nervous about the wedding. "Mom, what if we're rushing into this?" Sarah asked suddenly. Linda Wilson looked at her daughter intently. "Are you having second thoughts?" "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I don't know him at all. He never talks about his past, and I haven't met his family." "Honey, pre-wedding jitters are normal. I was nervous before my wedding to your father, too." But Sarah knew it wasn't just nerves. Something was wrong, and she couldn't figure out what it was. Across town, Eleanor Campbell stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, buttoning up a black dress. She had chosen it specifically. Strict, elegant, suitable for both a celebration and a funeral. In the week since her conversation with Ethan, Eleanor had become a different person. The pain and humiliation had gradually transformed into cold rage. She had found out everything about the upcoming wedding: the time, the place, the number of guests. St. Patrick's Church, 11 a.m., about 50 guests. Eleanor opened the safe in the wall and took out a small revolver, a gift from her late husband, who had insisted that she be able to defend herself. In 20 years of marriage, she had never held it in her hands, but yesterday she had spent an hour at the shooting range outside town, refreshing her skills. The gun fit easily into her handbag next to her makeup case and documents. Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror one last time. A respectable middle-aged lady on her way to a wedding. No one would suspect anything strange. "Ethan Riley," she whispered. "You thought I was a helpless old woman. Today you'll find out who I really am." Detective Marcus Gray had planned to spend Saturday at home with his family. The 45-year-old man with graying temples had been with the Riverdale Police Department for 20 years and deserved a quiet weekend. But his plans changed when the phone rang at 7 in the morning. "Gray here." "Marcus, this is Tom from Dispatch. We've got a strange call. A woman claims that a crime may be committed at a wedding at St. Patrick's Church today." Gray sat up in bed. "What kind of crime?" She didn't say. She just said that a young man is in danger. The call was anonymous, but the voice sounded familiar. A drug addict? Mentally ill? Not likely. She spoke clearly and to the point. She asked us to increase patrols in the area around the church. Gray sighed. In a small town, you had to take any threat seriously, even if it seemed crazy. "All right, send a patrol car there. Have them keep an eye on things from a distance." He didn't know that the anonymous caller was Gladys Morton, who had been up all night thinking about her encounter with Eleanor. The old teacher knew people well and had seen something in Eleanor's eyes that made her fear for the young con artist. By 10:30, St. Patrick's Church began to fill with guests. The small Gothic building, built in the 1890s, was decorated with white lilies and roses. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky remained gray and threatening. Ethan stood at the altar in a rented tuxedo, nervously adjusting his tie. Next to him stood his cousin Danny, his only relative with whom he was on speaking terms, acting as his best man. The church was filled mostly with Sarah's friends and colleagues, a few of Ethan's acquaintances from the bar, and the Wilson family's neighbors. "Nervous?" Danny asked quietly. "A little," Ethan replied, looking around at the crowd. He was looking for familiar faces, but didn't see anyone threatening. In the week since his conversation with Eleanor, he had expected some kind of repercussions, a call to the police, a scandal, an attempt to disrupt the wedding. But nothing had happened. Perhaps pride had prevented her from disgracing herself in public. In the back rows sat an elegant woman in a black dress and a wide-brimmed hat. She held the wedding program and glanced at her watch from time to time. None of the guests paid any attention to her. In a small town, weddings were often attended by distant acquaintances or colleagues. Eleanor felt surprisingly calm. All her doubts and hesitations had disappeared. She knew exactly what she had to do and why. This man had ruined her life, humiliated her, and robbed her blind. Worse than that, he was about to deceive an innocent girl who loved him sincerely. The organ began to play Mendelssohn's Solemn March. Everyone stood up and turned toward the entrance. Sarah appeared in a simple but beautiful white dress that she had saved up for 3 months to buy. With her father's arm around her, she slowly walked toward the altar, beaming with happiness. Ethan looked at his bride and felt a rush of tenderness. He truly loved this girl. After the wedding, he would give up his life of crime and become an honest family man. The money he had stolen from Eleanor would give them a good start. Sarah approached the altar and stood next to Ethan. Her father solemnly gave her hand to the groom and stepped aside. The priest, an elderly Father O'Brien who had baptized Sarah 20 years ago, opened the prayer book. "Dear brothers and sisters," he began in a solemn voice, "we are gathered here in the presence of the Lord to join Ethan and Sarah in holy matrimony." Eleanor slowly rose from her seat in the back row. Several people turned to look at her, but she paid no attention to them. With quiet steps, she began to walk down the center aisle toward the altar. "Marriage is a sacred union established by the Lord himself," the priest continued. Ethan noticed the movement out of the corner of his eye and turned around. When he saw Eleanor, he paled and instinctively took a step back. "What is she doing here?" he whispered to Danny. Eleanor continued forward, her eyes fixed on Ethan. A restless whispering began in the church. The guests did not understand what was happening. "Excuse me," Eleanor said loudly, stopping a few steps from the altar. "But I cannot allow this marriage to take place." The priest paused and looked at the woman in confusion. "Madam, if you have any objections—" "I do," Eleanor said firmly. "This man is a fraud and a liar." A dead silence fell over the church. Sarah looked confusedly at Ethan, then at the unfamiliar woman. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Eleanor Campbell, and your fiancé stole $18,000 from me." Ethan took another step back. "You're crazy! Security!" "No one forced me to give you the money," Eleanor continued, without raising her voice. "I did it out of love the love you so skillfully imitated." Sarah looked at her fiancé in horror. "Ethan, what is she talking about? She's mentally ill! Don't listen to her!" "I am the financial director of Riverdale Manufacturing," Eleanor said to the assembled crowd. "For the past few months, this man has been deceiving me, swindling me out of money under false pretenses. He told me about his sick mother, who doesn't exist, about his father's debts, which never existed." Sarah's husband began to cry. The church guests buzzed like a disturbed beehive. "Eleanor, stop!" Ethan shouted. "You're disgracing yourself." "I'm already disgraced," she replied calmly. "Thanks to you, but I won't let you ruin this girl's life." Eleanor turned to Sarah. "Darling, he'll deceive you too. As soon as he gets access to your money, to your property, he'll disappear, or find a new victim." "That's not true." Sarah grabbed Ethan's arm. "Tell her it's not true." Ethan remained silent, staring at Eleanor with hatred. "Say it!" Sarah shouted. "Fine!" Ethan exploded. "Yes, I took money from her, but she gave it to me. She bought me gifts, paid my bills. She was willing to give everything just to get a young man to pay attention to her." Sarah let go of his hand as if it had burned her. "You think I needed those pathetic thousands? Ethan continued, losing control. She offered it to me. She begged me to take it. A lonely old woman who was willing to pay for the illusion of love. Eleanor stood motionless, listening to him destroy what little dignity she had left in front of a church full of people. At that moment, something inside her broke. "You're right," she said quietly, opening her purse. "I was a lonely old woman who believed in fairy tales." Her hand found the handle of the revolver. "But you know what, Ethan?" Eleanor raised the gun, pointing it at the young man's chest. "Old women can be dangerous." The next few seconds seemed like an eternity. Sarah screamed. The guests scattered. The priest tried to hide behind the altar. "Eleanor, don't!" Ethan shouted, raising his hands. "Think of the consequences." "I've been thinking about it all week," she replied with icy calm. "And you know what I've come to?" "What?" "Some people don't deserve to live." The shot rang out like thunder in the enclosed space of the church. Ethan clutched his chest and fell onto the marble steps of the altar. Blood began to spread across the white stone. Sarah fell to her knees next to her fiancé, trying to stop the bleeding with her hands. "Someone call an ambulance!" she cried through her tears. Eleanor stood with the smoking gun in her hand, looking at the result of her actions. She felt neither satisfaction nor regret, only a strange emptiness. "Madam, drop your weapon!" came a voice from the entrance to the church. Eleanor turned and saw two policemen with their guns drawn. Detective Gray rushed into the church after them, assessing the situation. "Drop your weapon immediately," one of the officers repeated. Eleanor looked at the revolver in her hand, then at the dying Ethan, then at the sobbing Sarah. Slowly, she put the gun on the floor and raised her hands. "Eleanor Campbell," she said to Detective Gray. "I shot Ethan Riley. Arrest me." Gray nodded to the officers, and they handcuffed Eleanor. Chaos reigned around them. People were screaming, crying, filming the scene on their phones. Ambulance sirens could already be heard in the street. "Why?" Gray asked as his men led Eleanor away. She looked at him with tired eyes. "Because he deserved it, Detective, and because I couldn't live knowing that he was destroying other people's lives with impunity." Detective Marcus Gray spent the next 48 hours sorting through the most unusual case of his career. Eleanor Campbell sat in a holding cell and answered questions with the weary calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Tell me again about your relationship with Mr. Riley," Gray said, turning on the tape recorder. "I've already told you 3 times. Tell me a 4th time." Eleanor sighed and repeated the story of how she met Ethan, how he manipulated her, how he extorted money from her. Gray listened and took notes. As the investigation progressed, the picture became clearer and more repulsive. Bank records confirmed the money transfers. Expensive gifts from Eleanor with price tags were found in Ethan's apartment. Brian Mitchell, the bar manager, after much persuasion, confessed to being an accomplice and described the scam. "He specialized in single women over 40, Brian explained to the prosecutor. "He studied their habits and found their weaknesses. He had a whole card index of potential victims." The card index contained photographs and notes on 12 women, including Eleanor. 3 had already testified about how Ethan had tricked them out of their money. The amounts ranged from $3,000 to $20,000. "Mrs. Campbell," Gray said during another interrogation, "you understand that murder was not the solution to the problem?" "What was the solution?" asked Eleanor. "Go to the police? With what? I had no proof of coercion. I gave him the money myself." "You could have just left, forgotten about him, and let him deceive other women? Ruined the life of the girl who was going to marry him?" Gray understood her logic, but he couldn't agree with her. "No one has the right to take the law into their own hands." "Detective, I'm 65 years old. At my age, you begin to understand that justice and the law are 2 different things." Sarah Wilson spent 3 days in the hospital under the supervision of a psychiatrist. The shock of what had happened was so great that she couldn't eat or sleep. Her mother never left her bedside. "How could I not have seen it?" Sarah repeated through her tears. "How could I have been so blind?" "It's not your fault," Linda comforted her. "He didn't just deceive you." But Sarah felt guilty. Guilty for not asking the right questions, for not insisting on meeting his family, for believing his sweet words and beautiful promises. The worst part was realizing that the ring on her finger, The cottage they had rented, the plans for their honeymoon, all of it had been paid for with money stolen from a lonely woman. She took off the ring and never wore it again. A week after the tragedy, Sarah returned to work at the Red Robin restaurant. Her colleagues and customers looked at her with pity and curiosity. Some sympathized, some condemned her for her blindness, and some just wanted to hear the details of the scandal firsthand. "I quit," she told Dolores at the end of her first shift. "Sarah, don't make any rash decisions." "I can't stay here. Everything reminds me of him, of the fool I was." Dolores hugged the girl. "You weren't a fool. You were in love." A month later, Sarah moved in with her aunt in Columbus, where she enrolled in the psychology department at the university. She wanted to understand how people manipulate each other, how to recognize lies, how to protect herself and others from emotional predators. Eleanor Campbell's trial began 4 months after the murder. The prosecutor demanded that she be found guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances, premeditated murder in a public place. The defense attorney, an experienced James Collins, built his case on emotional distress and temporary insanity. "My client was brutally deceived and humiliated," he told the jury. "She acted in the heat of the moment." But Eleanor did not want to hide behind temporary insanity. "I was in my right mind," she declared in court. "I knew what I was doing, and I take full responsibility." The trial attracted nationwide attention. The media presented the story from different angles: an elderly woman's revenge, the tragedy of loneliness, justice, or vigilante justice. Eleanor received letters of support from women across America who had themselves been victims of fraud. The testimony of Ethan's other victims was crucial. Rosa Garcia, a 52-year-old nurse, recounted how he swindled her out of $8,000 for treatment for his sick mother. Margaret O'Connor, a 47-year-old teacher, lost $12,000 to help her disabled sister. "He was a real predator," testified Rosa. "He studied our weaknesses and hit them right on target. He said exactly what we wanted to hear." Witnesses for the defense spoke of Eleanor's exemplary behavior, her charitable work, and her professional achievements. Gladys Morton testified about how she tried to prevent the tragedy. "I saw something terrible in her eyes," said the old teacher, "but I didn't think she would go as far as murder." The most dramatic moment came when Eleanor herself took the stand. The prosecutor tried to portray her as a cold-blooded avenger who had planned the murder. "Did you buy the gun in advance?" "Number, the gun belonged to my late husband." "But you went to the shooting range?" "Yes, the day before the wedding." "So you were preparing for murder?" Eleanor was silent for a long time. "I was preparing for justice." "Isn't it the court that is supposed to deliver justice?" "The court administers the law. That's not always the same thing." The defense attorney asked her how she felt when she fired the shot. "No feelings," Eleanor replied. "Just the realization that the world had become a little safer." "Do you regret what you did?" "I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret stopping the predator." The jury deliberated for 2 days. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Eleanor as a heroine who had protected other women from a con man. Others considered her a murderer who had no right to take the law into her own hands. The verdict was a compromise: guilty of manslaughter with aggravating circumstances. Not first-degree murder, as the prosecutor had demanded, but not temporary insanity, as the defense had hoped for. Judge Robert Herring, a gray-haired man with 40 years of experience, read the sentence in a crowded courtroom. "Eleanor Campbell, the court sentences you to 12 years imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 8 years." Eleanor accepted the sentence without emotion. At 65, she understood that she might not live to see her release, but that did not frighten her. Eleanor entered the state women's prison with dignity. She was placed in a separate cell for security reasons. The case had received widespread publicity, and the administration feared both attacks and attempts at vigilante justice by other inmates. But the fears proved unfounded. Many of the women in prison were themselves victims of male violence and deception. They treated Eleanor with respect, seeing in her a woman who had fought back. "You did what most of us didn't have the courage to do," said her cellmate Maria, who was serving time for murdering her abusive husband. Eleanor got a job in the prison library. She helped illiterate inmates write letters, advised them on financial matters, and taught computer literacy classes. For the first time in many years, she felt truly needed. Eleanor Campbell died in a prison hospital 5 years after her sentencing. Lung cancer had been diagnosed too late. She was 70 years old. Eleanor Campbell's story has been studied in law and psychology colleges. Her case has been cited in discussions about the limits of self-defense, the rights of fraud victims, and the ethics of revenge.